In the world you know, Avatar Aang's final battle against Fire Lord Ozai was a one-sided struggle, until the result of one of Ozai's attacks unblocked his final chakra and allowed him to access the Avatar state again. With this power, he turned the tide of battle and eventually rendered the Fire Lord harmless. In this world, Aang is not so fortunate. There is no accidental unlocking of the Avatar state, and Aang is unable to overpower Ozai. His life ends in fire. His story does not end there, however. As Aang awakens in the spirit world, he is greeted by Avatar Roku. When the realization hits, Aang is inconsolable as he apologizes for not being enough. Roku patiently tells him that he hasn't failed yet. According to him, many spirits observing the physical world agreed that this conflict was unwinnable without access to the Avatar state. As a result, they had preemptively discussed how to deal with the coming loss of balance. With the Fire Nation's triumph over the Earth Kingdom, they could focus their full might on the Water Tribes. As the next Avatar would be born into the Water Tribe, there was little hope they would be kept safe long enough to learn the elements. The Earth and Fire Avatars after would also be found quickly. With no air nomads left, the Avatar would cease to exist. Aang asked what he was expected to do when he had already died. Roku said it wouldn't stay that way for long. With no hope for the present, the spirits were resorting to changing the past. The number one reason why winning was all but impossible for him was because of the time. Mastering all the elements in a year was a seemingly impossible task, and Aang had done incredibly well to already be proficient in all of them. As such, they were going to send him back in time to when he first emerged from the iceberg. With another year to prepare, he should be able to become a fully realized Avatar before the comet arrives. Aang doesn't know if he can do it again though. He doesn't know if he can stand his friends, his new family not knowing who he is. Roku asked him to remember what he said after they viewed his past with Sozin. Some friendships even transcend lifetimes. He says to view it as an opportunity. He asked Aang to think of how much hurt he could prevent with this foreknowledge. Aang remembers how the moon was killed, how Ba Sing Se fell from the inside out, how Jet died to help them. Aang has his resolve again and says he'll do it. Roku says he knows he can do it. A bright light surrounds him as the spirits send him away. As Aang came to, his vision was filled with the face of Katara. It had worked. He has to resist the urge to hug her right there and then and never let go. She and Sokka weren't his friends yet, but they would be. He briefly considers telling them that he's a time traveler, but dismisses it. He doesn't want to tell them how he failed so badly he had to restart his life. He greets them and feigns not knowing what happened. He can't make himself as energetic and as immature as he was last time, but seeing them again makes it easy to keep a smile on his face. Soon enough, they're all on Appas as he swims back to their village. When Katara spots his arrows again inside one of the huts, he once again hides that he's the Avatar. He's accepted that he is the Avatar, but he wants their friendship to start with him being just Aang, and not the Avatar. He once again gets her to go penguin sledding with him. It felt like ages since he had done something to enjoy himself. He didn't want to go into the abandoned Fire Navy ship again, so he made an excuse to fly up as high as possible to see if Zuko's ship was already close. Much to his relief, he spotted it in the distance. Rather than ask to go inside, He asked Katara more questions, which led to the same conclusion as last time, that he had been frozen for 100 years. They returned to the village, and since the flare hadn't been set off from the ship, Aang was still in the village when Zuko's ship arrived through the ice. When Zuko made his demands of where the Avatar was, Aang revealed himself immediately before he approached the villagers. He made the same request as he did last time. He'd go willingly if the village was left unharmed. Zuko gave his agreement, and they left on the ship without further conflict. His escape went as he remembered, except this time he was able to do it without relying on the Avatar state. Now that they know he's the Avatar, Katara asked him about waterbending lessons. Water was the one other element besides air that he considered mastered. He could teach Katara without ever having to go to the North Pole. But as he thought about what happened last time, he realized they couldn't avoid going there. If they didn't, Katara wouldn't change the northern tribe's outdated traditions. Zhao's invasion could succeed, and Yue. He said he didn't know enough to properly teach her, and proposed going to the northern water tribe to find a master together. Katara agreed, and Sokka wasn't about to let her leave without him, so their journey began just as it did last time. Aang didn't want to return to the Southern Air Temple. He already knew the truth of things, but he still wanted to find Momo. He showed the temple to Sokka and Katara, as he did last time, and unlocked the door to the Room of Avatars. When Momo appeared, he tried his best to catch him earlier, but he still ended up in the room where Monk Gyatso had perished. Despite already knowing what happened, seeing it again brought forth all the tears and sadness he had been suppressing. He didn't know how long he mourned, not just for his guardian, but for everything that had been lost from having to start over. Sokka and Katara stayed with him throughout all of it, embracing him on either side. And the mood was lifted slightly as Momo joined them again. The next stop was Kyoshi Island, so that they could meet Suki again. He considered going straight to the village this time, but after hearing Sokka make sexist comments again, he decided the ambush would be the best way to humble him. He may have also wanted to ride the elephant koi again. Once they were captured and then freed, Aang spent his time learning about Avatar Kyoshi, rather than let his son's celebrity status in the village go to his head. This time, when Katara brought up not staying there too long, he agreed with her. Sokka insisted on staying longer so he could train more with the Kyoshi warriors. Aang suspected he really wanted to spend more time with Suki, but they still outvoted him. As they prepared to leave, Suki gave Sokka a kiss on the cheek just before they took off. Just in time, as once they took off, they saw Zuko's ship was about to reach the island. Aang made sure to fly Appa close enough to be spotted so that the ship would follow them away, sparing the village from being set ablaze. Their next stop was Omashu. Aang was too eager to meet his old friend again to make his friends ride the supply chutes. He instead asked a local who the current king is, and when he hears his friend's name, it's all the excuse he needs to force his way into an audience with him. Aang is confused when Bumi is too shocked at seeing him alive again to try his Mad King act. Once they reunite, Bumi still issues the 3 challenges, this time not needing to use Creeping Crystal on his friends. With his foreknowledge, he completes the first 2 challenges immediately. Bumi becomes suspicious, and when it comes time for the duel, he doesn't give Aang a choice this time and makes himself the opponent. Aang fights well, but Bumi is able to make him slip up. He instinctively uses earthbending to escape an attack. Aang manages to win, and Bumi asks to speak to him in private. There he lays out his suspicion that he's somehow done this before. Aang can't find any reason not to confide to his friend what happened and confirms this. He tells Bumi everything. When he expresses his guilt at hiding this from Sokka and Katara, Bumi says he has done nothing wrong by keeping this foreknowledge to himself at this point, but that he should tell them eventually when the time is right. Aang then asks why he seemed more surprised than last time to see him alive. After talking through the events leading up to this, Bumi deduces that one of the 2 times he entered the Avatar state last time triggered spiritual locations in each nation to signal his return. Since he hasn't entered the Avatar state in this time yet, most of the population still think the Avatar doesn't exist anymore. He'll have to wait and see if that changes anything. As they leave Omashu, Aang wonders if Bumi will do anything different, with the knowledge that the Fire Nation will soon target his city. Aang then considered going to Galing and befriending Toph early, but he realized she probably wouldn't appreciate spending such a long time in the North Pole, where the city was nothing but ice. So he kept Appa on course for Haru's village. He was going to change things there. The look on Haru's mother's face when her son was taken away was something he never wanted to see again. He couldn't remember the exact location of the prison barge beyond being offshore, so he allowed things to play out as they did initially until sunset. When Katara left on a walk with Haru, Aang made his own excuse to leave and headed to where the cave-in happened last time. He didn't know the exact location, but he heard and saw when the cave collapsed. Aang arrived first, and knowing Katara and Haru would be there soon, wasted no time saving the old man with his own earthbending. When they did arrive, Aang explained the old man was in trouble, but was vague about how he had actually saved him. As anticipated, the old man ratted him out, and they arrested him instead of Haru that night. His friends protested, but he insisted he'd be fine as they took him away. He knew his friends would follow him on Appa, but he didn't anticipate that they'd free him before the boat had arrived to the barge, or that Haru would join them. Still, the metal prison was in sight, and they ended up using the same plan as last time to provide earthbenders with coal. Seeing his son Haru again inspired Tyro to step up and fight, and the rest of the prisoners followed suit. They were soon free, and Haru chose to stay with his father again. Before they left, Aang made sure Katara had her necklace this time. When they came across an area of forest that the Fire Nation had burned down, Aang was no less upset than he was last time. When an old man arrived from the nearby village, he was surprised when he warned them to stay away rather than ask him for help. Then he remembered what Bumi said. The world at large didn't know that the Avatar had returned, and so the old man had no reason to assume he was the Avatar. Sokka asked why the village was dangerous, and the old man explained how a spirit was taking villagers away at night. Aang insisting on helping, despite the man's doubts, and they headed to his village. Come night time, the Heibai spirit appeared as Aang expected. He managed to get through to them and presented an acorn as he did last time. The spirit shifted back into a panda, and the villagers were returned. When the villagers ask how he could do that, Aang considers hiding who he is. However, he remembers that last time, news of his return brought people hope, so he doesn't hide that he's the Avatar. The villagers are elated and give them supplies and money as they did last time. Aang then considers his next move. He already knows about the comet and the time limit, so he doesn't need to rush to the Fire Nation to meet Roku again. He could also talk to Roku whenever he needed now, since his experience with the lion turtle. Aang decided he should probably talk to him anyway. He told his friends he wanted to try something since it was the solstice, and asked that they let him meditate. They walked a distance away, and after a few moments of concentration, Roku's spirit appeared before him. Roku seemingly remembers the previous timeline, which prompts Aang to ask why the Heibai spirit seemed to remember nothing. According to Roku, the time travel affected the spirit world as well. The only spirits that remembered are the ones that turn back time for him, and the avatars by virtue of being connected to him. As Aang digests this, Roku says that keeping his circumstances secret is understandable, but that it will also harm him eventually. By keeping his secret, he is stopping himself from practicing the other elements. Should this go on for too long, he will run out of time again. Roku faded away as the conversation ended. When Katara and Sokka asked what they talked about, Aang told them about the comet and the time limit that they learned about last time. He hated lying, but he wasn't ready to speak of his failures yet. With no need to rush to the Fire Nation, they decided to stay in the small village for a few days. Unfortunately, Aang didn't anticipate Zuko and his men finding the village the next night. Appa sounded the alarm as they approached the village, but the three of them were able to leave in time. A tense standoff happened as Zuko threatened to light the town on fire if he didn't surrender. Aang was about to yield when the Heibai reappeared. It was still the solstice, and so it could still punish those that would burn down its forest. It roared, and a blast of blue energy blew Zuko and his men off their feet. Iroh stepped in at this point, putting himself between the spirit and his nephew. Rather than fight it, he bowed and asked the spirit for forgiveness, stating that he and his men would leave this forest without quarrel. Zuko started to protest this, but Iroh put his foot down and said if they continued to anger this spirit, all of them could be dragged to the spirit world and never be seen again. Zuko reluctantly heeded his uncle's words and ordered his men to retreat out of the village as the Heibai glared at them. Once they disappeared, it faded away again. Aang suggested they leave immediately, but Sokka said they should stay until after the solstice. So long as the Heibai spirit could appear, the Fire Nation wouldn't approach the town. Aang and Katara reluctantly agreed with him, and they stayed for another day before taking off. The next thing to happen after this was their run-in with the pirates. He considered if the stolen waterbending scroll was something they could do without. Katara had learned the water whip from it, and it had eventually been given to Wang Shitong in exchange for exploring his library. Katara would learn the move eventually anyway once she became a master, and Aang had the date of the solar eclipse burned into his memory. Aang considered skipping that specific town entirely, but the bison whistle he'd found had proved invaluable throughout his journey. So, when they resumed their journey, Aang made an excuse to visit the town. Since they hadn't washed their supplies down a stream, Sokka and Katara were much less bothered about his purchase. Aang had been the one that was swayed into looking at the pirates' wares last time, so avoiding them and leaving town was rather easy. When they eventually landed for the evening, Aang suggested he and Katara practice waterbending. Aang explained how water's similarity to airbending made it easy to pick up the few moves he already knew. He then offered to teach her this neat move he knew called the water whip. With Aang taking up the teaching position, Katara was able to practice without snapping at him, like last time. A few days later, when they landed in a forest of red trees for the night, Aang knew what was coming up next. Jet's fate was something he was determined to change. Last time, he had been too focused on fighting Appa to properly comprehend Top's words until much later. Jet had possibly given his life to help them find Appa, and that wasn't going to happen this time. At this point in time, however, he wasn't to be trusted. Like last time, they came across the Fire Nation animal traps, and Sokka suggested they leave the area by walking since Appa was so noticeable. Aang didn't complain about walking this time, and Katara didn't make fun of Sokka as much as a result. When they stumbled into the Fire Nation camp, they were once again saved by Jet's freedom fighters. As they brought them back to their hideout in the trees, Aang did his best to remain unbothered at the way Katara was looking at Jet. Once she saw what he planned to do, it wouldn't be an issue anymore. It was nice seeing the other members again, though, and he allowed himself to enjoy the night's festivities. Sokka was once again invited on a mission, and Aang thought about following them, but ultimately decided not to. If he did anything to convince Katara to leave early, Jet would still find a way to blow up the dam and keep harassing civilians. Something about how his plan failed last time resulted in Jet seeking a new life in Ba Sing Se, so Aang would try to keep things the same as last time for now. That didn't mean he wasn't going to support Sokka, though. When Sokka returned and told him what happened, Katara once again asked Jet for his side of the story. When Jet produced the blade with poison the old man supposedly had, Aang pointed out that if he was an assassin, he would have failed his mission if they didn't attack him at all. Jet said that would have resulted in him having free rein to search for their hideout. Aang remained quiet, knowing further arguing wouldn't help. Sokka stomped off, and Jet said he needed their water bending to fill up a reservoir, as the Fire Nation was going to burn the forest down. They found Sokka and informed him of this, but he still wanted to leave as he didn't trust Jet. Katara accused him of being jealous, but Aang spoke up and said he didn't trust Jet either. Katara was stunned by this, and Sokka looked relieved that he wasn't alone in his suspicion. Aang said they still couldn't leave if the forest was going to be burned down, however. Katara stormed off, annoyed at the both of them. Aang allowed things to play out as they did last time. They fought Jet, and he ended up frozen again, and Sokka managed to evacuate the village before the dam was destroyed. As they left on Appa, Katara was far harsher on herself for being the only one not to see through Jet's act.
Hey, thanks for watching to the end. If you want to see more of this type of content, please like and subscribe. My next video will be a sequel to my Super Smash Bros. Video, where I'll give each character in Melee their own Mortal Kombat style ending after beating the final boss. Hopefully it won't take too long to complete. With that, I say goodbye and leave you with this riddle. A man builds a house with all sides facing north. A bear walks past the house. What color is the bear?